Welcome, friend. Tonight, we drift into hours of Bleach lore, a quiet journey through the worlds between life and death, where swords whisper the names of souls, and light and shadow weave together in eternal balance. Let the noise of the day fade behind you now. Let the rhythm of your breathing slow to match the gentle pulse of spirit energy that hums beneath all things. We'll wander softly through Seirite's white corridors, past the drifting petals that fall like memories, into the endless sands of Mundo, where even the silence dreams. As you listen, think not of battles or endings, but of the spaces in between the pauses, the stillness, the warmth of connection that binds every soul across the flow of time. These stories are not about victory, but about becoming, about finding meaning in impermanence and peace in the act of remembering. So, rest your thoughts and let your spirit settle beside mine. If you haven't already, please subscribe and join our quiet circle of dreamers, and tell me softly, before we begin, where are you listening from tonight? In the world of Bleach, the air itself seems to carry a secret hum, an invisible rhythm between the living and the departed, a silent tide that sweeps unseen beneath the surface of existence, making every breath feel as though it is borrowed from another place, another heartbeat, another life that once was. And it is within this endless motion that the souls of all beings find their path, drifting gently from the warmth of the mortal world into the quiet expanse of the afterlife, where the Shinigami watch over them like distant constellations guiding lost travelers across a night sky that never ends. This balance, so fragile and so absolute, is what keeps the worlds whole, for when a soul leaves its body, it must not linger too long, must not lose itself to despair or forgetfulness, for in that forgetting comes hunger, and in hunger comes the hollow, that echoing emptiness that devours what it cannot become, creating ripples that disturb both the living realm and the serene sanctuaries of the dead, making the task of the Shinigami not one of violence, but of healing, guiding, and restoring the invisible thread between the worlds, so that the cycle of souls can continue to spin endlessly and peacefully. The Soul Society stands as the cradle of these wandering lights, a realm neither heaven nor hell, but something gentler, more ancient, a reflection of the human heart itself, built upon the idea that every soul has its place, and every ending is only another kind of beginning, showing that death, in this universe, is not a darkness, but a transition, a sigh between two moments. There, the flow of souls called the cycle of reincarnation is maintained through quiet duty and divine order, for the Shinigami purify the corrupted and send the pure onward, their black robes flowing like shadows against moonlit gates, their swords whispering with power drawn from the very essence of the self. And as we listen closely, we might hear the faint murmur of their world, the low clang of bells marking the changing hours in Seirite, the soft rustle of wind through sakura trees whose blossoms fall endlessly, even though the seasons never change, and the distant footsteps of patrols walking along the edge of both existence and dream, making sure that the stream of souls does not overflow, that the weight of memory does not drown the fragile hearts who have crossed over. To the Shinigami, each soul is a story, a melody woven from joy and sorrow, laughter and regret, and they carry these stories lightly but reverently, for they know that every purified spirit adds another note to the harmony that sustains their realm, a reminder that they too were once human, once afraid, once alive, and that their duty is both burden and mercy. The balance between life and death is not a war of opposites, but a dance, where light and shadow move together, where birth and decay share the same song, and where the Shinigami are both the dancers and the audience, moving with the rhythm of eternity. Yet beneath that harmony lies a tension, a quiet truth that even the gods of death cannot fully master the imbalance that comes when souls are lost or forgotten, when hollow infests the world of the living, when sorrow grows heavy enough to break the circle. It is then that the Shinigami must descend, unseen, to cleanse what has been tainted, to lift the soul from its despair and send it onward. In those moments, the air shimmers faintly, and a gate opens where no one looks, and the sound of a sword unsheathing is not a herald of battle but of release, a sigh that says, "You can rest now." And so the flow continues, ceaseless and patient, for thousands of years, guided by unseen hands and quiet hearts, showing that the afterlife is not a punishment, but a continuation of the great story of being, and that the Shinigami themselves, for all their solemnity and strength, are merely caretakers of that story, guardians not of death but of the meaning that remains after it. If one could stand upon the border between the worlds, one would feel it not a wall, but a current, a thin, trembling thread of energy that binds all things together, humming softly like a note held too long, shimmering like heat over stone. That thread is the essence of the reishi, the spiritual particles from which all things in the Bleach universe are born and sustained, from the grand gates of Seirite to the faintest ghost in the human world. Everything breathes with reishi, everything returns to it, and within that cycle lies both order and mystery, creation and decay, intertwined like lovers who have never known separation. And perhaps, as we drift along this current, we might wonder whether the flow of souls remembers us, whether the echoes of our laughter, our choices, our dreams continue to move through it long after we've gone, mingling with the wind in Rukongai, carried by unseen tides toward rebirth. For in the world of Bleach, the soul is never truly lost. It only changes form. It only sleeps between moments, waiting to awaken once more in another life, another story, another heartbeat that will in time return to the river that began it all. And so, as the stars shimmer faintly above Seirite and the gates of the afterlife stand quietly ajar, the flow of souls continues endlessly patient, endlessly kind, showing us that life and death are not boundaries but reflections, each gazing softly into the other's eyes, whispering, "I understand." There are certain nights when the wind feels heavy, as though it carries whispers from another world, and in those moments, the boundary between what we see and what we sense begins to fade, creating a trembling silence that stretches across the heart. It was within such stillness that Ichigo Kurosaki's story began, not with glory or prophecy, but with a simple, human instinct, the need to protect, to stand before something fragile and say, "You will not be taken tonight." That instinct, born of loss and carried in the quiet corners of his heart, was what connected him to the unseen world, long before he ever touched a sword or heard the word Shinigami. Ichigo's name means one who protects, and perhaps fate heard it too clearly, weaving it into the flow of souls that had long been watching him from behind the veil. In the ordinary streets of Karakura town, beneath flickering lamplight and drifting clouds, he lived a life half in shadow, seeing what others could not, feeling the presence of spirits clinging gently to the corners of the living world, children who never went home, mothers who still waited, old men who watched from bridges as the water passed beneath them. To Ichigo, this was normal, though it was anything but. His eyes were windows too wide for a single world to contain, making him both blessed and burdened by vision. And then came Rukia, the night she entered his life like a falling star, her presence cutting through the stillness of his ordinary existence. In that instant, two fates intertwined, like threads drawn together by something older than destiny. Rukia, a Shinigami bound by duty, wounded and fading, and Ichigo, a boy who could not watch another die. It was an act born of compassion, not ambition, that changed everything, her blade piercing him, not to end a life, but to awaken one. When her power flowed into him, it was not only spirit energy that was exchanged, but memory, weight, and the understanding of a world that exists in layers, the living, the dead, and those who walk between them. Ichigo stood, his body no longer bound by gravity or fear, and in that moment of awakening, he became something both new and ancient, a bridge between realms, a substitute soul reaper whose duty was not inherited by blood but chosen by heart. The first time he wielded Zangetsu, the blade seemed impossibly vast, like a fragment of night itself forged into steel, reflecting the boundless power of the soul that had summoned it. Yet, unlike the other Shinigami whose training shaped them from childhood, Ichigo's power came raw and untamed, like a storm refusing to be named, making him both dangerous and beautiful, a spirit still learning how to exist in two worlds without losing himself to either. But what defined Ichigo was never merely his strength. It was the way he carried his sorrow and his love in equal measure. His mother's death had left an emptiness within him, a guilt that settled deep, shaping every choice that came after. That wound became his compass, leading him to protect others not as duty but as redemption. Every hollow he faced, every soul he saved, was a whisper of that promise he made long ago to a ghost he could never forget. There is something profoundly gentle about Ichigo's power when you listen closely, not the clash of blades or the roar of energy, but the quiet resolve of someone who refuses to turn away, who sees pain and steps forward instead of retreating. Even his battles feel like conversations between souls, like moments of understanding written in the language of motion and light. Each strike is a word, each clash a confession, and within that rhythm lies his truth, that strength exists to protect, not to destroy. Rukia's presence remained the steady pulse behind his awakening, guiding him through the chaos of this new existence. She became both mentor and mirror, showing him what it means to bear the weight of souls, to walk through the darkness without losing the light. Their bond, unspoken yet undeniable, was never about romance. In the simple sense, it was something older, the meeting of two kindred spirits across lifetimes, teaching each other how to live, how to die, and how to keep moving even when the world fractures beneath their feet. As Ichigo grew into his role, the boundary between life and spirit became less a line and more a thread that pulsed through him. He began to sense the deeper hum of existence, to feel the spiritual energy that wove through everything, the gentle pressure of a passing ghost, the flicker of hollow Ryatsu from distant alleys, the pulse of the Soul Society itself, breathing somewhere far beyond the stars. In dreams, he would sometimes see endless white plains and a man standing alone beneath the sky, wrapped in black, holding a massive blade, a reflection of himself, and yet not himself, whispering lessons in a voice carried by wind. That man was Zangetsu, his inner world's guardian, his sword spirit and his own soul intertwined. Theirs was a dialogue that transcended words, made of trust and fear, of breaking and mending, of learning that even power must bow to understanding. Ichigo's growth was not a straight path but a spiral, each battle bringing him closer to himself, each failure carving away another layer of doubt, revealing the quiet truth that strength is born not of dominance but of empathy. And so, as we drift further into his journey, we find that Ichigo's awakening is not simply about becoming a warrior, but about remembering what it means to be human, while carrying the weight of spirits, remembering that courage is the act of standing when your heart trembles, remembering that even the smallest light can illuminate the boundary between worlds. In the hush of Karakura nights, where streetlights flicker and the wind carries the scent of rain, Ichigo's soul continues to move, neither wholly human nor fully Shinigami, but something between, something that understands the sadness of ghosts and the fragile hope of the living. His story is the first ripple in the vast river of Bleach, the awakening that stirs the still water, reminding us that every soul, no matter how ordinary it seems, has the power to change the flow of eternity. There is a certain stillness that surrounds Rukia Kuchiki, a grace so quiet that it feels like snowfall in a forgotten garden, each flake falling soundlessly until the world itself seems to hold its breath. And in that silence, one begins to understand her not through words or deeds, but through the spaces between them, the pauses where her emotions live, unspoken and profound. Rukia's story is one of restraint and resilience, a tale of a soul who has walked through centuries of memory and found beauty in the ache of endurance, her every gesture polished by time, her every glance carrying the echo of duty. She was born in Rukongai, the outer districts of the Soul Society, where poverty and hunger still cling to the air like mist, yet even there she shone with a quiet dignity that drew others to her. Life in those forgotten streets was harsh, and the souls who lived there had long since learned to bury their dreams beneath survival. But Rukia, small, sharp-eyed, and kind, learned instead to listen to the rhythm of life around her, to the laughter of children amid ruins, to the strength that grows in silence. It was there that she met Renji, another orphan with fierce eyes and a heart that would one day burn alongside hers in loyalty and longing, their bond forming in the small spaces between hunger and hope. When she was adopted into the noble Kuchiki clan, the transition was not one of triumph but of sacrifice, for to become a Kuchiki meant to let go of who she had been. Byakuya, her new brother, was a figure carved of porcelain and frost, bound by duty so tightly that love itself became a wound. He taught her grace, but in his restraint she learned loneliness, the loneliness of perfection, of bearing a name too heavy for its bearer. She carried that name as she carried her sword, carefully, quietly, never forgetting that honor can sometimes be another form of burden. As a Shinigami, Rukia moved with purpose through the world, her power manifesting not in fury but in elegance, her Zanpakutō, Sode no Shirayuki, a blade of pure white, like moonlight turned to ice. Every movement she made was poetry and restraint, a dance that froze the air and stilled the chaos around her. Her power reflected her soul, calm, measured, beautiful, and devastating in its serenity. There was no arrogance in her strength, only acceptance, a recognition that every fight is both an ending and a prayer for balance. When she descended to the human world and met Ichigo, she had already lived through countless missions, had seen countless souls pass through the gates of rebirth, yet something about that encounter shifted the quiet rhythm of her existence. In Ichigo, she saw not just potential, but humanity, a fierce, unyielding will that reminded her of what she had once buried under nobility and discipline. And in giving him her powers, she broke every rule of her station, every oath she had sworn, not out of rebellion, but compassion. It was a moment that would redefine both their fates, a single spark lighting the path to everything that followed. In the aftermath of that decision, Rukia's stillness deepened. Stripped of her power, she lived among humans as one of them, learning their simplicity, their humor, their fragility. She learned the warmth of laughter, the weight of guilt, the strange comfort of imperfection. It was as though the human world had gently reminded her that the soul is not meant to exist only in duty but also in feeling, and that the heart, too, must breathe. And yet, her peace could not last. When the Soul Society came for her, when she was condemned for her mercy, she faced her punishment with that same quiet grace, unflinching, her eyes steady, her heart resigned. Her capture was not an act of weakness but of acceptance, for she understood that love and justice often stand at odds, and sometimes to remain true to one's beliefs is to walk willingly into the fire. In those cold prison cells, beneath skies the color of memory, Rukia waited for death with a calm that shook the heavens. But what she did not foresee was how deeply she had already changed the world around her, how Ichigo and his friends would defy fate itself to save her, how her presence had become the bridge between the ordinary and the divine, between the human and the Shinigami, between despair and redemption. When Ichigo appeared at the execution grounds, when his blade shattered the unbreakable, the moment became more than a rescue. It was a revelation. Rukia, who had once seen herself as small and forgettable, realized that she had been the quiet axis upon which worlds turned, that her choices had set countless souls in motion. It was not power that defined her, but connection, the unseen threads she wove simply by being true to herself. Rukia embodies the paradox of the Bleach universe, the softness that holds infinite strength, the stillness that carries motion, the humility that shapes destiny. Her presence is like snow upon water, delicate yet persistent, dissolving even as it changes the surface. Beneath it, through her, we see that salvation often arrives in whispers, not in thunder, and that love is not always spoken, but lived through sacrifice, through loyalty, through the quiet act of staying. As time moved and battles passed, Rukia grew into her own power, no longer the shadow of her brother or the guide of another, but a Shinigami of grace and authority, her Bankai unfurling like the first breath of winter. Even then, her essence remained the same, calm, contemplative, and radiant in restraint. And so, Rukia stands as the bridge between two worlds, between the nobility of Soul Society and the humanity of Karakura, between the silence of the dead and the noise of the living. She teaches us that duty can coexist with compassion, that fragility is not weakness, and that even the smallest act of mercy can alter eternity. If you listen closely, in the stillness of her presence, you can hear the faint hum of falling snow, the sound of forgiveness, the whisper of balance restored. Rukia Kuchiki, the snow that never melts, the memory that never fades, the soul that walks between light and shadow, endlessly serene. There is a moment, just before waking or falling asleep, when the edges of the world blur and one feels the faint shimmer of something vast beyond perception. And if you could linger in that breath between dreaming and remembering, you might glimpse the Soul Society, the grand city of spirits, suspended between the cycles of birth and forgetting, where the light has a quieter hue and the air hums with stories untold. It stretches endlessly, built not of stone or steel, but of memory and order, shaped by the will of souls who have passed beyond the mortal world yet still cling to its rhythm, their existence woven into streets that never age and gates that never close. The Soul Society is not heaven, though it feels like a place untouched by time, nor is it punishment, though sorrow lingers in its corners like dust. It is balance incarnate, A said, reflection of humanity's heart in its purest form, where each spirit finds the echo of its former life and continues it, not in luxury or torment, but in simplicity, in the act of existing among countless others who have crossed the same threshold. The Rukongai districts, sprawling far beyond the central walls, form the outer body of this world, vast and uneven, where countless souls reside, living humble lives that mirror the human villages they once knew. The further one travels from Seirite, the quieter and more desolate the districts become, until even sound itself fades into the wind, and those who dwell there live as echoes of humanity, waiting perhaps for rebirth, perhaps for peace. Seirite, the shining heart of the Soul Society, rises at the center like a dream within a dream. Its white walls are said to be unbreakable, glowing softly beneath an eternal sky where the light never dims completely, casting shadows long and serene. The air there feels different, denser, purer, alive with the vibration of Reishi, the spiritual essence that sustains everything. It is within those walls that the Gotei 13 reside, the 13 divisions that serve as both guardians and guides, maintaining the flow of souls and defending the delicate balance between the worlds. Walking through Seirite is like wandering through a living poem, narrow paths winding between immaculate gardens, bridges arching gently over quiet streams, the sound of wind chimes mingling with the footsteps of those who patrol unseen. The captains move through its streets with quiet reverence, their presence as steady as the architecture itself, while the younger Shinigami train in courtyards where petals fall even when there are no trees, carried by winds from the Rukongai. The city feels both ancient and newborn, as if it remembers every soul that has ever walked its paths, and yet always awaits new footsteps to give it meaning again. There is a certain harmony in its structure, a sense that every wall, every gate, was placed not merely for defense but for balance, creating a rhythm of open spaces and enclosed sanctuaries that mirror the cycles of life and rest. The great gates that mark the entrances guarded by giants of old spirit flesh, and will stand like thresholds between waking and dream, where the Shinigami pass through on their endless duties to the human world. To witness one opening is to feel the breath of eternity move, slow and deliberate, as if the world itself is exhaling after holding it in for too long. Within the center lies the Sokyoku Hill, a solemn place where judgment is rendered, where the flame of execution once burned against the wind. Yet even there, silence prevails more than fear, for the Soul Society is not built upon cruelty, but upon the belief that every act, even the harshest, serves the greater order of balance. Around it stand the barracks, the halls of command, the archives filled with centuries of recorded memory scrolls and scripts written in calligraphy so elegant it seems alive. Every corner of Seirite breathes with history. Every breeze carries whispers of past captains, of wars fought, of peace rebuilt. But beyond the order and beauty lies the unspoken truth that even in this afterlife, hierarchy endures. Nobles walk in quiet estates, surrounded by walls higher than dreams, while the poor of Rukongai labor for scraps of warmth and meaning, their souls forgotten by the rhythm of bureaucracy. The Kuchiki clan, the Shihoin family, and other noble houses bear centuries of honor and duty, their bloodlines infused with the authority of tradition, and yet, within those noble chambers, loneliness lingers, a reminder that even paradise carries the weight of imperfection. Still, the Soul Society endures because it is not a utopia, but a mirror. It reflects the best and worst of the human heart, its compassion, its pride, its endless need for purpose. The Shinigami who patrol its halls are not gods, but caretakers of meaning, warriors who wield both sword and spirit to protect the fragile connection between worlds. Each soul that arrives there adds something new to its rhythm, a laugh echoing in a marketplace, a prayer whispered by a forgotten shrine, a song sung by those who remember fragments of a past life they can no longer see. When night falls, if one could call it night, the stars above Seirite seem closer than they should be, bright and slow, as though they are souls drifting just beyond reach. The city quiets, its white walls glowing faintly under their gaze, and somewhere, far beyond, the flow of souls hums on through the rivers that divide the districts, through the air that feels both weightless and eternal. It is then that the soul society feels most alive, not in its duty or its order, but in its silence, in the faint sound of wind over rooftops and the distant echo of bells marking a time that does not exist. To walk its streets is to understand the truth of the Bleach universe, that death is not the end but another form of continuity, that structure and spirit are one and the same, and that every soul, no matter how small, contributes to the equilibrium of all existence. The Soul Society does not merely house the dead, it teaches them to keep living in another way, to remember, to forgive, to find purpose beyond the beating of a heart. And as we drift deeper into the heart of this realm, the air thick with memory and the scent of eternity, we begin to see that it is not only a place, but a state of being, a reflection of all the souls who pass through it, each one leaving behind a trace, a whisper, a light that never truly fades. The Soul Society, a city beyond life, where silence sings and eternity breathes softly, waiting for the next story to arrive. There are few things more hauntingly beautiful than the sight of 13 black-robed figures standing beneath an unchanging sky, their forms calm and still as windless flame, each one a vessel of centuries, each one a guardian of the balance that holds all worlds together. They are the Gotei 13, the 13 court guard squads, a name that carries the weight of history and quiet reverence, a name spoken softly even in the corners of the Soul Society where rumor and legend intertwine. To speak of them is to speak of order itself, for their existence is the pulse that keeps the river of souls in motion, the steady hand that guides the eternal cycle between life and death. The Gotei 13 were not born from peace, but from the ashes of chaos. Long ago, when the worlds trembled under the endless conflict between Shinigami, hollow, and lost souls, the first generation gathered under the shadow of Yamamoto, Genryusai Shigekuni, an ancient being whose very presence felt like an ember that had forgotten how to die. With his flame he forged unity, and with unity he forged order. Each division became a piece of that design, a reflection of both discipline and individuality, making the Gotei not a uniform army, but a constellation of souls bound by purpose. Division 1 stood at the heart, the command, the calm gaze of authority. Yamamoto himself was the embodiment of the sun at dawn and dusk, his fire both creation and destruction. His gaze, deep as molten rock, had seen centuries turn to dust, and yet he remained, holding the structure together by will alone. Beneath him, the captains and lieutenants served as the rhythm of the Soul Society, each with their own story, their own scar, their own philosophy on what it means to protect. Division 2 moved like shadows, swift, silent, and unseen. Under the lineage of the Shihoin clan, and later the cold precision of Soifon, it became the blade hidden within the sheath, a reflection of efficiency and secrecy. Theirs was the art of assassination, but even there, one could find poetry, the elegance of motion, the grace of disappearance, the mercy of speed. Division 3 and 4 offered contrasts, the first often caught between ambition and loyalty, the second devoted entirely to healing and preservation. Captain Unohana, serene and unshakable, led the 4th Division like a mother guiding lost children, her hands gentle, even as her eyes carried the weight of an ancient warrior's guilt. Her halls smelled faintly of herbs and quiet rain, and her subordinates whispered that in her silence lived both compassion and death. The fifth division, once a place of calm intellect, would become the seedbed of betrayal, and yet even there the light of understanding continued to burn. Aizen, the captain whose voice flowed like silk over blades, stood once among them, and his shadow would stretch across the Soul Society for generations, showing that even guardians can fall, and even truth can disguise itself as kindness. In the sixth division, pride took form in the posture of Byakuya Kuchiki, a noble whose composure was so precise it bordered on divinity. His every gesture was a ritual, his every word measured, yet beneath that elegance lay grief and love so deep it could only manifest as silence. His lieutenant, Renji Abarai, burned with the opposite, a fiery devotion, rough and unrefined, yet pure. Together, they reflected what it means to serve not through obedience alone, but through understanding the weight of legacy. Division 7 carried justice in its rawest form, its captain Komamura, a giant both in body and in soul, his very existence a testament to loyalty that transcended appearance. In Division 8, under Shunsui Kyoraku, there was laughter and warmth, the soft rebellion of a man who understood that duty without joy becomes cruelty. He drank sake beneath the blossoms, flirted with the wind, and fought like a poet, effortless, unpredictable, devastating when provoked. Division 9 watched the flow of history itself, archivists of deeds, chroniclers of truth. Division 10 stood under the clarity of snow, where Captain Hitsugaya, young yet ancient in composure, carried himself like a winter spirit, guarding his own thawing heart. Division 11 was chaos-made honor Zaraki Kenpachi's realm, where battle was prayer and the clash of swords was the language of existence. To step into that division was to enter a storm that knew no end, yet within its violence lay purity, the absolute expression of being alive. Division 12 pursued science and progress, its halls filled with contraptions and whispers of forbidden experiments. Kurotsuchi Mayuri turned curiosity into cruelty, yet even he was part of the necessary whole, a reflection of how knowledge, too, can teeter between salvation and madness. Division 13, the home of Rukia and Ukitake, was the division of gentleness, of compassion woven through duty, where kindness stood as quiet defiance against the harshness of eternity. Ukitake himself, kind and sickly, carried within his frailty a light that healed those who stood near him, his smile like morning over still water. Each division, each soul within it, became a note in the great song of balance. Together, they were not perfect, far from it, but that imperfection gave them humanity. Their rivalries, friendships, and unspoken griefs made them more than soldiers. They were reflections of life itself, even in death. The Gotei 13 were never just protectors. They were a family bound not by blood, but by shared purpose and pain, their unity forged through centuries of loss and renewal. And as one stands before them, it is easy to forget that these beings are souls too, that beneath the robes, the power, and the titles lie hearts that ache, laugh, and remember. They uphold the cycle not because they must, but because something within them still believes in the sanctity of balance, in the fragile beauty of existence. When night falls over Seiraite, the barracks of the Gotei glow faintly, lit by paper lanterns that sway in the wind, their flames trembling like tired hearts. From afar, they look like stars resting on the ground, reflections of the souls who guard the heavens. Somewhere, a captain reads an old haiku. Somewhere else, a lieutenant sharpens a blade. The bells toll across the divisions, not marking time, but memory, the rhythm of eternity continuing as it always has. The Gotei 13 eternal guardians, flawed and divine, both sword and shield of the afterlife, stand not as conquerors of death, but as its caretakers, ensuring that every ending folds gently into another beginning. And as we drift past their quiet halls, through the night air that hums with spiritual light, we can almost hear their unspoken vow carried by the wind. We are here. We will keep watch. Until all souls find peace, there are souls whose presence feels like still water reflecting the sky, untouched by wind or storm, and others who move like flame, restless and alive, burning to be seen. And between them lies a tension that creates balance, the quiet dance of pride and devotion. Within the vast halls of the 6th Division, this harmony takes form in two figures who could not be more different, yet whose fates are bound as tightly as the threads of a silken cord. Byakuya Kuchiki, noble heir of ancient lineage, and Renji Abarai, the rough-edged warrior whose loyalty shines brighter than ambition. Byakuya's presence is like winter still, immaculate, his words measured as if each syllable might tilt the order of the universe. He moves with a grace born not of practice but of inheritance, a refinement so complete it feels almost divine, and yet beneath that calm lies a solitude that has no end. The Kuchiki name is an empire of silence, built on generations of restraint, where emotion is a luxury too dangerous to bear. To be a Kuchiki is to live as a monument, to carry the weight of nobility until even the act of breathing becomes ritual. Byakuya obeys that code not out of arrogance, but out of reverence, for it was his father and grandfather who entrusted him with the family's unbroken honor, and it was his promise to his late wife, Hisana, that sealed the walls around his heart. When she died, her final wish was that he find her lost sister Rukia and protect her. He did so, not through affection, but through duty, adopting her into the Kuchiki line even as he forbade himself to love her as family. That contradiction became his burden to honor love by denying it, to fulfill a promise by becoming what he most feared, a man bound more by rule than by heart. Renji Abarai, by contrast, carries no such composure. He was born in the outermost slums of Rukongai, a place where souls struggled even to remember their names. There, life was raw and fleeting, survival a kind of art. Renji's eyes burned red with determination long before they burned with power, and every scar on his body was earned through reaching upward toward strength, toward belonging, toward recognition. Where Byakuya's path was paved in expectation, Renji's was carved from struggle, each step forward an act of rebellion against obscurity. When Renji and Rukia were children, they shared the hunger of the forgotten for warmth, for food, for meaning, and together they built dreams from dust. It was she who first gave him purpose, and when she left for the nobility, he followed, determined to bridge that impossible distance. Within the Gotei 13, his rise was not blessed by heritage but by effort, his spirit molded through grit and loyalty. He revered Byakuya not merely as his captain but as the living embodiment of everything he aspired to: composure, mastery, control. Yet the closer he came, the more he understood that strength without heart is a hollow crown. Their relationship, though framed by hierarchy, became a mirror through which both men confronted themselves. Renji's impulsive devotion tested Byakuya's calm. Byakuya's distant perfection tested Renji's patience. When Rukia was condemned, it was Renji who broke rank, who defied the weight of tradition to save her. revealing that devotion can shatter chains more easily than pride ever can. And when Ichigo came storming into the Soul Society, it was Renji who stood between duty and friendship, his blade trembling with the truth that his heart could no longer bear silence. Byakuya, witnessing that defiance, felt his own walls begin to fracture. He had believed that to protect Rukia meant to uphold the law, to preserve the system that gave her place meaning. But when he saw those same laws threaten to destroy her, he remembered Hisana's face, her plea, and the centuries of words he had never spoken. The moment Ichigo stood before him, challenging not his power but his pride, Byakuya was forced to confront the truth that honor without compassion is vanity, that to follow law without question is to abandon the soul itself. Their battle was not merely physical but spiritual, a storm of petals and blood, of ideals and regrets. Byakuya's Senbonzakura, the countless blades of cherry blossom steel, moved with beauty so absolute that it seemed like sorrow given form. Renji's Zabimaru roared against it, fierce and unrefined, the sound of rebellion echoing through centuries of silence, and when the dust settled, neither truly won nor lost. Byakuya's strength remained, but his heart had shifted, thawing just enough to allow the possibility of forgiveness. Afterward, a quiet respect grew between them, the kind that does not need words. Renji continued to follow, not because he was commanded, but because he chose to, understanding that devotion is not servitude, but recognition of shared purpose. Byakuya, in turn, began to see in Renji not a subordinate, but a reflection of his own lost youth, the part of him that once wanted to fight for something pure and unrestrained. Through the years and the wars, that bond deepened. They fought side by side, their swords complementing one another precision and passion. Moonlight and flame, Renji learned the elegance of restraint, while Byakuya learned the strength of imperfection. Together, they became the living embodiment of the 6th Division's dual nature: pride that serves, loyalty that questions, devotion that transcends formality. Byakuya's cherry blossoms still fall with unearthly grace, each petal carrying the weight of his composure, while Renji's roars of defiance still shake the air, carrying the pulse of the streets that birthed him. And between them stands Rukia, the silent bridge, the memory that binds them, the reason both men learned that strength alone cannot sustain the heart that it is in connection, in forgiveness, that the soul finds balance. When the wind passes through the Kuchiki estate at night, it carries with it the faint sound of falling petals and distant laughter, as if somewhere in the stillness, Byakuya allows himself a quiet smile, and somewhere else, Renji trains beneath the stars, his sword flashing like a promise. Pride and devotion, two souls intertwined, teaching each other how to bow without surrender, how to rise without forgetting where they began. Every Shinigami walks with a shadow at their side, but that shadow does not follow. It listens, it breathes, it dreams. It is called the Zanpakutō, and it is more than a weapon. It is the echo of one's soul, drawn into form, bound in steel and spirit, a living reflection of all that a Shinigami is and all that they might become. Each blade is born the day its wielder first reaches into the quiet heart of their own being and touches the place where strength and fear meet. And in that sacred contact, a name is spoken soft, eternal, a whisper that only its owner can truly hear. The Zanpakutō is not forged by hands but by heart, its edge shaped by emotion, its hilt wrapped in the thread of memory. No two are alike, for no two souls are alike. Each carries its own will, its own slumbering consciousness, its own landscape hidden deep within the wielder's inner world. To awaken a Zanpakutō is to awaken oneself, to see the truths buried beneath masks and duty, to accept the beauty and danger of one's own nature. It is a relationship not of control, but communion, where power is not taken, but shared through understanding. In the beginning, a Zanpakutō rests dormant, its spirit unseen, its voice muffled by inexperience. The Shinigami wields it like any blade, using it to guide souls, to purify hollows, to maintain balance. Yet, over time, as connection deepens, the sword begins to whisper, first faintly, then more clearly, until its name emerges from the silence like the breaking of dawn. This is the Shikai, the first release, the first act of trust between soul and steel. To call a Zanpakutō by name is not merely to command it, but to acknowledge it, to recognize the part of oneself that has always been waiting to be seen. Each Shikai takes form in ways that mirror its wielder's essence. Some become flowing and graceful, others harsh and unpredictable. Rukia's Sode no Shirayuki, pure and white as falling snow, reflects her stillness, her restraint, her quiet beauty. Renji's Zabimaru, wild and segmented like a serpent, mirrors his fierce loyalty and untamed heart. Byakuya's Senbonzakura, whose petals transform into countless blades of pink light, reveals the paradox of elegance and lethality that defines him. Beauty as destruction, pride as both armor and wound. But beyond Shikai lies something deeper, rarer Bankai, the second and final release, achieved only through years of communion, of conversation between soul and spirit. To reach that place, one must confront the self completely, for the Zanpakutō is honest in ways the mind is not. It knows what its wielder hides: the doubt, the guilt, the longing, and only when these are accepted can true harmony be reached. When a Shinigami achieves Bankai, it is not simply power that awakens, but revelation. The sword and the soul become indistinguishable, the boundary between inner and outer worlds dissolving into one. Yamamoto's Rujinjaka burns like the memory of the first fire, its heat so intense it scorches the very air. The reflection of a man whose will has shaped centuries, whose soul is flame itself. Hitsugaya's Daiguren Hyorinmaru spreads wings of ice across the sky, the embodiment of control and purity, a child's calm born of wisdom older than he appears. Kenpachi, whose blade remained nameless for so long, wields his sword like instinct given form, proof that connection cannot be forced, that even power, without understanding, remains incomplete. In each spirit's inner world, landscapes unfold that reflect their wielder's truth. Ichigo's endless blue sky and rain-soaked city, Rukia's quiet field of snow, Renji's wild jungle of bones and beasts. To enter that world is to step into the heart of one's being, to stand before the spirit who lives there and listen to what they have to say. Sometimes they are kind, sometimes cruel, but always honest, always waiting for recognition. The Zanpakutō is both mirror and guide, teacher and companion. The quiet truth that power without acceptance becomes emptiness. And yet, these swords are not slaves. They have desires of their own. Some rebel against their masters, testing them with silence or refusal. Others weep in unison with their wielder's sorrow, their edge dulling when the heart falters. They are alive, and so they suffer, they dream, they remember. There are legends of Zanpakutō spirits who continue to wander after their wielders fall, carrying within them the lingering warmth of devotion, whispering their names to the wind until time itself forgets. When the Zanpakutō manifests, when the spirit steps from dream into reality, it reveals its true nature. Some appear as warriors, others as beasts, some as children or elders or reflections of what might have been. They are the language of the soul rendered in form, a dialogue between mortality and eternity. And in moments of crisis, when the Shinigami's heart fractures, it is often their Zanpakutō that speaks the loudest, urging them onward, reminding them that strength does not come from the blade, but from the bond that shapes it. There is something profoundly beautiful in this relationship, the idea that within each soul lies another, a companion born from the same essence yet distinct, guiding its wielder toward truth. The Shinigami, in their black robes, may seem solitary, but they are never truly alone. Every step they take, every strike they deliver, every breath they exhale is shared with the spirit that walks beside them, unseen but ever present. When a Zanpakutō is broken, it is not merely a weapon that shatters, but part of a life, a friendship, a conversation cut short. And when it is reforged, it is not through skill of hand, but through the renewal of faith, the willingness to listen again. The sword is not an extension of the Shinigami, it is the Shinigami, the embodiment of everything they are and everything they must face. In the quiet of Seirai's nights, if you listen carefully, you can hear them, the soft hum of dormant swords resting in their sheaths, whispering in dreams, their voices like distant bells calling through eternity. They are not tools of death, but keepers of the soul's memory, the eternal companions of those who guide the flow of existence. The Zanpakutō blades with souls, hearts of steel and silence, stand as proof that even power can be sacred, that every spirit carries within it a reflection waiting to be known. And as long as they exist, the bond between life and death will remain unbroken, shining faintly in the dark, like the gleam of a blade beneath a moon that never sets. There are places in existence where even light forgets its way, where sound becomes memory before it can become echo, and it is in those spaces that the hollows dwell, spirits twisted by hunger, stripped of form, their hearts consumed by the ache of what they lost. To understand them is to look directly into the shadow that follows all souls, the unhealed part of existence that bleeds quietly beneath the balance the Shinigami strive to protect. They are not monsters by design, but by consequence, born from loneliness so deep it corrodes the self, until all that remains is instinct and ache, a mouth forever open, crying out for something it can never name. Every hollow was once human, once tender and flawed, once capable of laughter and love. But when a soul lingers too long in the world of the living, refusing to let go of regret, its chain of fate begins to erode, link by link, until the heart caves inward. That implosion gives birth to emptiness, and from that emptiness, a mask is born, white, cold, unyielding. The mask does not conceal, it defines. It becomes the face of loss itself, an armor against remembrance. The hole that pierces their chests is not a wound, but a mirror, a perfect symbol of the absence they have become, showing that even in death, pain can still shape the soul. Hueco Mundo, the world of hollows, stretches beneath an endless night. Its sky glows faintly with a false moon, pale and patient, casting silver over dunes of white sand that go on forever. There are no stars, no horizon, only dunes, shaped by the breath of eternity, shifting but never changing. The air tastes dry, almost brittle, and the wind carries the faint hum of despair, as though the land itself remembers the countless cries of the lost. Here, time is different. It does not pass so much as linger, the same way sorrow lingers in the heart long after tears are gone. In this desolate expanse, hollows wander endlessly, feeding upon one another in a cycle as cruel as it is natural. They devour not out of malice, but necessity, their hunger echoing the human need for connection that once defined them. Some remain simple, their forms monstrous, their minds gone. Others evolve, their spirits sharpening into awareness, their masks cracking just enough for identity to flicker through. From these arise the Menos, the vast, towering giants whose steps shake the pale earth, their roars echoing like storms in the void. Among them, the most conscious the Ajuchas and Vasto Lord Bear, forms of strange beauty, both beast and man, predator and philosopher, kings in a kingdom of sand. Hueco Mundo, for all its emptiness, holds its own kind of serenity. Beneath the eternal moon, dunes ripple like water, and the occasional fortress rises like a fossilized dream. Among these stands Las Noches, the grand citadel that pierces the night with its stark white domes and corridors. It is a palace built by those hollows who remembered ambition, who sought to reclaim identity from oblivion. Its walls are smooth and pale, its halls silent except for the faint echo of footsteps, reminders that even emptiness desires meaning, even despair seeks form. In this world, the hierarchy is fluid, determined not by birth but by hunger and will. The strong consume the weak, and from that endless consumption emerges evolution, a cruel imitation of life's striving. And yet, within that cruelty lies reflection. Is it not the same hunger that drives the living, the same desperate yearning to be seen, to be filled, to leave a mark upon the void? The hollows are, in truth, the shadow of humanity's own longing, the mirror image of its unending desire to exist, to matter, to belong. When a Shinigami faces a hollow, it is not merely a battle of purification, but of understanding. The act of slaying is an act of release, freeing the soul trapped within its monstrous shell, returning it to the flow of reincarnation. Each purification is a small redemption, a whisper that says, "Your pain is remembered, your suffering ends here." And yet, for every hollow cleansed, others rise, for sorrow is infinite, and so too is the emptiness it leaves behind. Among the hollows, there are those who remember faint fragments of who they were, a song half remembered, a name without meaning, the outline of a face seen in dreams. These remnants flicker like candlelight against the wind, fragile but persistent. Some cling to them, others run from them, fearing that remembering might break what little peace oblivion offers. In this lies the tragedy of Hueco Mundo. It is not a hell of punishment, but of forgetting, a place where identity erodes grain by grain until even memory becomes hunger. And yet, even in that desolation, beauty remains. The moonlight glints across the dunes like frost, and the faint hum of spiritual energy creates a rhythm that feels almost like a heartbeat. There are moments when the wind shifts, carrying a note so delicate that one could almost believe the world itself is singing a lullaby for those who lost their way. Hueco Mundo is emptiness given form, yes, but it is also proof that even in voids, echoes persist, and that perhaps, somewhere within the endless white sands, the souls of the lost still dream of warmth. The hollows in their world are not opposites of the soul society, but its reflection, the same cycle seen from another angle. Where Seirite is structure, Hueco Mundo is chaos. Where one builds, the other consumes, yet both sustain the flow, both necessary to the balance. The Shinigami purify what the hollows become, and the hollows, in their hunger, reveal the fragility of the human spirit. Without darkness, light would lose its depth. Without emptiness, fullness would lose its meaning. And so the hollows roam, and the moon watches, and the dunes whisper. There is no dawn in Hueco Mundo, no end to the night. But perhaps that is its mercy, for in perpetual night there is no need to mourn the day. In that stillness, The souls who once suffered find a kind of rhythm, a lull, that softens their endless hunger into something quieter, almost peaceful. They are emptiness, but even emptiness, when seen closely, has texture, has memory, has grace. The hollows, the lost hearts of creation, remind us that the line between salvation and sorrow is as thin as breath, that to fall is not always to vanish, and that even in the deepest shadow, the soul continues to reach, to ache, to dream. There comes a point, even in emptiness, where longing becomes creation, where the hunger of the soul turns inward and reshapes itself, reaching once more for identity, and from that quiet rebellion against oblivion were born the Arankar, the hollows who tore away their masks and reclaimed the faces they had lost. It is a strange, almost sacred defiance, a whisper in the endless white of Hueco Mundo that says, I am still here, I am still someone, and through that act, they blur the line between human and monster, between shadow and light. To remove one's mask is to bleed, to break, to reveal. The hollow's mask is both shield and prison, and in shattering it, the Arankar expose the remnants of their humanity, a memory long buried under the sand. But this awakening comes with pain, for the void remembers, and what it gives back is not innocence, but awareness. The Arankar walk like ghosts, who have found their names again only to realize they no longer know what they mean. Their power grows with their sorrow, and their sorrow deepens with their understanding, a perfect circle of self and loss intertwined. When Sosuke Aizen first discovered them, he saw not monsters but potential, not chaos but evolution. He became their god not by birthright but by vision, the belief that even emptiness could ascend, that even despair could take form and wear the beauty of order. Under his hand, the scattered sands of Hueco Mundo gathered into empire, and the Espada were born 10 blades forged from the void, each embodying a fragment of human sin, each reflection of how far longing can go when it forgets the way back to peace. The Espada are not soldiers in the usual sense. They are philosophies given flesh, fragments of existence sharpened by understanding. Each bears a number, a rank, carved into their being not merely as hierarchy, but as symbol, the degree to which they have embraced and transcended their emptiness. At the top, Coyote Stark, the Primera Espada, who embodies loneliness so profound that even his power divides itself to escape isolation. He does not seek to conquer, he seeks companionship, and that desire, pure and tragic, makes him the strongest of all. Beneath him, Baragan Luisenbairn, the Segunda Espada, once king of Hueco Mundo, a sovereign of decay, whose every breath carries the scent of endings. Time bends before him, aging all it touches, and in his arrogance lies understanding that all things crumble, that power itself is dust waiting to fall. Tyr Harrible, the Tercera, stands as calm water in a world of storms, her strength born from compassion, her eyes carrying the promise that even in destruction, dignity can survive. And then there is Ulquiorra Seifer, the Cuarta Espada, the hollow who stared deepest into the void. His eyes are the color of desolation, his voice a whisper of logic too fragile to be human. He believes in nothing because he has seen everything reduced to silence. Yet in the end, it is he who reaches out in wonder, who, in the final flicker of existence, feels the faint warmth of a human heart and asks, "Is this what you call a soul?" His death becomes not an ending, but a revelation that even the emptiest being can find beauty in what it cannot possess. Neutra Gilga, the Quinta, fights not to win, but to prove that weakness exists in all things, that pain is truth. His grin hides exhaustion, his violence conceals longing. Grimjow Jaggerjackes, the sexta, roars through the world with the ferocity of a caged heart, forever chasing recognition, forever running from insignificance. He embodies the hunger that built Hueco Mundo itself, the refusal to be forgotten, the defiance of stillness. His every strike is a declaration, I exist, and I will be seen. The lower Espada Zomari, Saelaporo, Arañero, Yami, each carry their own reflections of human flaw, obsession, vanity, envy, rage. They are the faces of emotion untempered by empathy, the sides of humanity that burn too brightly and too blindly. Yet even they, in their cruelty, reveal truths about the soul that every being, no matter how hollow, seeks meaning in the act of expression, even if that meaning destroys them. To witness the Espada is to watch philosophy at war with itself, a ballet of belief and void, where every clash of sword and sero beam is a question asked by one part of the universe to another. Why do we fight? Why do we exist? What does it mean to feel? Their battles are elegies, their deaths quiet verses in the grand poem of balance. For though they fall, the ripples of their existence remain, stirring the flow of souls like wind through reeds, their stories carried to the edges of eternity. Hueco Mundo, under their reign, became more than a wasteland. It became a kingdom of paradox death that dreams of life, silence that learns to sing. Las Noches glowed faintly under its eternal moon, its corridors filled with the hum of spiritual resonance, the faint sound of footsteps that might have been prayers. The Espada sat in chambers that felt like cathedrals, their conversations soft and philosophical, even as they prepared for destruction. In their unity, there was loneliness. In their power, vulnerability. They were gods of a desert that had forgotten the word for rain. And yet, perhaps, that was their purpose, to remind the cosmos that even in despair there can be poetry, that even the most broken things can reflect light. The Arrancar were the next step in the evolution of the soul, the proof that even the void strives toward awareness. In them, we see that emptiness is not the absence of meaning, but its possibility, that the hollow heart, when it reaches outward, creates form, creates motion, creates beauty. When the dust of their battles settled, when their fortress crumbled and their moonlight dimmed, what remained was not silence but echo. The whisper of their existence lingers in the air of both worlds, faint but enduring, like a question still unanswered, like a sigh that refuses to fade. The Arrancar, the Espada, they are the evolution of the void, the dream of nothingness daring to become something once more. And perhaps, in that daring, lies the quiet hope of the entire universe, that even in the depths of loss, the soul continues to reach for shape, for warmth, for love, forever trying to remember what it once was beneath the mask. There are souls whose calm hides storms so vast that even eternity seems too fragile to contain them. And among all who have walked the corridors of the Soul Society, none carried that silence more perfectly, more dangerously, than Sosuke Aizen, the man who smiled like dawn but spoke with the patience of night, who held entire worlds behind his eyes and shaped them without lifting his hand. To call him traitor is to name only the shadow of his truth, for betrayal, in his case, was not rebellion but revelation, an unfolding of philosophy that sought to unmake the order he once swore to protect. He was the architect of illusion, the weaver of mirrors, the dreamer who looked at heaven and wondered whether it was too small. Aizen began as serenity made flesh polite, composed, the kind of presence that softened a room rather than claimed it. Those who served beneath him saw only warmth, intellect, and the quiet diligence of a man devoted to harmony. His subordinates admired him, his peers trusted him, and even his superiors looked upon him as the model of a Shinigami captain, measured, articulate, endlessly patient. But beneath that still water, there was a current, slow and immense, moving towards something unseen. For Aizen, the Soul Society was a cage built on the illusion of balance, and every law, every tradition, was another thread in a web of complacency. He believed that power without understanding was cruelty, but understanding without freedom was despair. In the center of that contradiction, he made his choice to transcend. The Hogyoku, a small and luminous sphere born from forbidden research, became the key to his ascension, not merely as a weapon, but as a mirror of will. It was said to grant form to the desire of the soul that touched it, and Aizen's desire was nothing less than to stand beside creation itself, to know what the gods of the Shinigami and Quincy and Hollows had forgotten, the reason why souls exist at all. His betrayal was not an act of impulse, but of orchestration. Every kindness, every smile, every word had been placed with the precision of a poet arranging syllables in a verse. He wrote destinies as if they were sentences, erasing and rewriting until the world reflected his own vision of truth. The day he revealed himself, when the false warmth dissolved and the truth of his power shone through, was not a moment of rage, but of unveiling. He ascended above Seirite on threads of light, his former allies staring up in awe and horror as the man they had trusted turned into a figure of myth, his voice calm, his eyes unflinching, his ambition infinite. The weapon of his deception was Kyoka Suigetsu, the mirror that commands all senses. To look upon it even once was to lose the certainty of perception, to see illusion as reality, to mistake truth for dream. Through it, Aizen rewrote the world around him, not with violence, but with suggestion, the quiet art of making others believe they were free while they moved according to his design. His genius lay not only in what he concealed, but in how he made others reveal themselves, exposing their fears, their desires, their devotion. He was not merely a manipulator of minds, but of meaning itself. And yet, for all his brilliance, there was loneliness at the heart of his journey. Aizen sought no equal, not because he despised others, but because he believed none existed. The isolation of superiority became his prison. The higher he climbed, the more the air thinned, until even his victories sounded hollow in the silence. When he turned toward Hueco Mundo, gathering the Arrancar beneath his banner, it was not conquest he pursued, but creation. He wished to sculpt a new order where the boundaries between Hollow and Shinigami, human and divine, would dissolve. In his mind, he was not a villain but an artist, reshaping the symmetry of existence. In the white halls of Las Noches, his voice carried softly over the hum of emptiness, every word deliberate, each gesture a sermon. To his followers, he offered vision. To those who served him, purpose. Yet even among them, he stood apart, as if the distance between himself and others was woven into his very being. Jin Ichimaru, his fox-eyed lieutenant, understood this best, moving through Aizen's orbit like a shadow that smiled, loyal and treacherous in equal measure. Their bond was one of silent acknowledgement. Two serpents coiled around the same question: how far can a soul go before it ceases to be itself? When Aizen finally faced the full force of Soul Society, when his illusions shattered and his ascension burned too bright for mortal sight, he revealed the heart of his philosophy. The world you believe in, he said, is merely the one your senses allow you to see. To him, even gods were blind. prisoners of perception. His rebellion was not against order but against limitation, his dream not of domination but of understanding. Yet the tragedy of Aizen is that he could never see that meaning lies not in knowledge but in connection, that the infinite he sought already existed in the fragile bonds he dismissed as weakness. His defeat came not through force but through revelation, the moment when his arrogance folded inward and he realized, perhaps too late, that even perfection must kneel before consequence. When the Hogyoku rejected him, when it decided that his desire had exceeded his truth, the great illusionist found himself trapped in the mirror of his own making, bound in silence, his power sealed not by wrath but by pity. Even imprisoned, his eyes remained calm, his voice soft, as if he were still teaching the world a lesson it could not yet comprehend. And yet, there is something enduring about Aizen's story, something that hums like a forgotten chord in the structure of the Bleach universe. He is the embodiment of the question that lingers in all creation: what lies beyond? His downfall is not failure, but completion, the closing of a circle too wide for others to see. In his arrogance, he became a warning. In his brilliance, an inspiration. Even as he sits in darkness, sealed beneath layers of Kido and time, the faint glimmer of his mind persists, dreaming still, rearranging thought into pattern, illusion into possibility. Aizen, the architect of betrayal, remains the mirror in which the soul society must continually see itself, its flaws, its pride, its yearning for control. For without those who question, even order becomes corruption, and without illusion, even truth loses its meaning. He is the whisper of ambition that lingers in every soul, reminding us that to seek understanding is divine, but to forget compassion is to lose the self entirely. And so he waits, the man who wanted to touch the face of God and instead found only his own reflection, staring back calm, endless, and terribly alone. There exists a silence between heartbeats, a moment where the pulse of existence hesitates, uncertain of which direction to flow, and it is in that fragile pause that the visored dwell souls split between two natures, bearing both the grace of the Shinigami and the curse of the hollow. They are the forgotten children of imbalance, the echo of Aizen's cruelty, and the testament to the soul's unyielding will to endure, walking forever at the edge of two worlds that neither fully accepts them. Their masks are not symbols of shame, but of survival, the quiet acknowledgement that even corruption can become identity when embraced rather than feared. The story of the Visored begins with tragedy veiled in secrecy. Long before they were exiles, they were captains and lieutenants, proud protectors of the Soul Society, loyal and unyielding in their duty. It was in the quiet depths of night that Aizen, still hidden behind his illusion of gentleness, began his experiments, merging hollow essence with Shinigami souls, seeking to create beings who could transcend both limitations. The results were horror and revelation intertwined, for those who were subjected to his ambition became infected not only with power, but with despair. Their souls began to fracture, and within that fracture, the mask of the hollow formed not as a weapon, but as a wound. To become a hollow is to lose the self, to sink into hunger and rage. But these Shinigami, anchored by strength and will, resisted that descent. Their bodies trembled, their screams filled the air of Seirite's forgotten chambers. Yet in that agony, a new equilibrium was born, the soul learning to hold two songs at once, the divine and the monstrous, light and shadow in the same breath. They fled before the world could call them abomination, and in exile they found one another, gathering beneath the gray skies of the human world to rebuild a semblance of peace among ruins of identity. In Karakura town, Far from the white walls of Sayerite, the Vizard found sanctuary in an abandoned warehouse, a place forgotten by both life and death, where dust floated like faint stars in shafts of morning light. There, they trained not to conquer, but to coexist with the emptiness within them. When the hollow within rose, clawing and screaming for dominance, they did not seal it away. They faced it again and again until the line between control and surrender blurred into understanding. The act of donning the mask became ritual, an invocation of balance, a reminder that one can dance with darkness without being consumed by it. Their leader, Shinji Hiroko, was the embodiment of paradox, cheerful and sly. His every word carried a twist of irony, as though he found humor in the world's cruelty. Yet behind that grin lay a deep melancholy, the awareness of betrayal and loss that no jest could truly mask. His power, like his spirit, was inversion, turning the world upside down, making attack into defense, weakness into strength. Around him gathered souls as broken and beautiful as his own. Hiyori, fierce as flame, whose rage was grief given form. Rose, whose every movement was music. Love, a gentle giant of quiet thought. Lisa, sharp-eyed and unflinching. Kensei, discipline made flesh. And Mashiro, a spirit of wild, uncontainable joy that defied despair itself. Together they were fragments that somehow fit, incomplete alone but harmonious in their imperfection. Their days passed in rhythm training, laughter, conflict, silence. They spoke little of the soul society they had lost, for nostalgia was a blade sharper than any Zanpakutō. Instead, they learned to exist as they were, not as they had been told to be. In their seclusion, they became philosophers of coexistence, discovering that the line between good and evil, between purity and corruption, was far thinner than the world pretended. Their masks, once feared, became symbols of wholeness, proof that even broken souls can sing. And when Ichigo Kurosaki's struggle began, when he too found himself split between the power of Shinigami and Hollow, it was the Vizard who reached out to him, not as teachers of technique but as mirrors of experience. They saw in him the same trembling uncertainty that once haunted their own reflections, and they guided him not toward control, but acceptance. They taught him that the hollow within is not an enemy to be slain, but a voice to be understood, that to deny one's darkness is to deny one's truth. Ichigo's time among them was brief, but the lessons endured that balance is not peace, but tension held with grace, that power is born from understanding one's contradictions. In him, the Vizard saw the future they had once dreamed of, a being who could walk between all realms without belonging to any, who could carry both sorrow and hope without letting either define him. Through him, they found a measure of redemption, the quiet realization that their exile had purpose, that their suffering had not been in vain. Still, their existence remained shadowed. The Soul Society remembered them as traitors, as creatures of contamination. The Hollows saw them as something alien, something neither prey nor kin. Yet in their solitude, they became the bridge the world did not know it needed, the reminder that purity is an illusion, and that the heart of creation beats strongest in the spaces between extremes. There are nights when the warehouse stands empty, its dust settling slowly in moonlight, and the masks rest in silence upon the floor, each one different, each one a testament to the soul that wears it. The air hums faintly with residual energy, the echo of laughter and screams interwoven into a single song, and if you listen closely, you might hear it, the murmur of acceptance, the sigh of reconciliation. The Vizard walk unseen, guardians of the threshold, living proof that even in corruption there can be grace, and that sometimes it is in the embrace of darkness that the truest light is found. They are the souls between breaths, the guardians of paradox, those who learned not to fear their shadows, but to wear them proudly as crowns. There are moments in history when even eternity seems to pause, when the rhythm of existence itself falters under the weight of what is about to unfold, and the air grows so still it feels like the universe is holding its breath, and in that suspended silence begins what the Soul Society would come to remember as the Winter War, a conflict fought not merely between soldiers, but between beliefs, between visions of order and chaos, light and shadow, mercy and pride. It began like a slow snowfall, soft and soundless, each flake a whisper of inevitability, and by the time the first blade was drawn, the world had already begun to change. In the heart of Hueco Mundo, beneath the pale glow of the eternal moon, Aizen's army gathered Arrancar, Espada, and those twisted by the will of the Hogyoku. Their white forms stood against the endless black of the void like ghosts assembled for judgment, their hearts hollow yet beating still with desire. In contrast, within the shining walls of Seirite, the captains of the Gote 13 prepared for war with the quiet acceptance of those who have long served balance. They polished their blades, they whispered prayers, and they stood upon the precipice of the unknown, knowing that even victory would demand a sacrifice too great to measure. The war did not come with the chaos of thunder, but with the stillness of a deep, slow breath the moment before release. When the sky above Karakura split open and the worlds touched, it was not an explosion but a blooming, a terrible and beautiful unveiling of the truth that no realm can exist untouched by the others. Light and shadow poured into one another, and within that mingling, countless souls trembled. Ichigo, standing at the center of that convergence, carried within him every contradiction of creation, Shinigami and hollow, human and spirit, protector and destroyer. His power was no longer something he understood, but something he endured, each heartbeat a test of identity. Around him gathered his friends, fragile yet steadfast, their courage shining like stars against the vast machinery of destiny. For them, fighting was not about conquest or vengeance, but about preserving the fragile warmth of their world, the laughter, the mornings, the small and irreplaceable moments that make existence worth enduring. As the battles unfolded, each became a story within the greater tapestry. Grimjow's defiance roaring like fire through cold air, Tosen's blindness breaking before the weight of his own justice, Barrigan's arrogance dissolving into the inevitability of decay. The captains faced their mirrors in combat, each strike a question, each wound a revelation. Hitsugaya's ice met the heat of mortality. Zaraki's laughter thundered across the ruins. Byakuya's petals fell like prayers over fields of broken glass. Amidst destruction, there was a strange, aching beauty, the beauty of souls revealing their truest forms in the face of oblivion. The air was thick with reishi, with the scent of ozone and sorrow, with the echoes of names shouted and remembered. Snow began to fall over the battlefield, not true snow, but ash and spiritual residue, descending softly, blanketing the ruins of Karakura and Huecomundo alike. It was as if the worlds themselves wept, their tears crystallizing into light that shimmered for only a moment before fading into nothing. In that twilight between victories and losses, Ichigo found himself before Aizen once more, the boy and the god, the seeker and the architect, two souls bound by the same yearning for understanding. Their confrontation was not simply battle but conversation, a dialogue written in motion, in impact, in silence between blows. Aizen spoke of evolution, of freedom from the chains of destiny, Ichigo answered not with words but with resolve, his sword moving like a heartbeat, steady, human, defiant. To face Aizen was to face inevitability itself, for he had become something beyond mortal comprehension. His body and spirit fused with the will of the Hogyoku, transcending the shape of man and stepping into something divine. Yet even divinity, when born of isolation, is brittle. Ichigo, through the power of the final Getsuga Tensho, offered not defiance but surrender, the willingness to give everything, even self, to preserve balance. His black hair turned to shadow, his eyes to dusk, his sword an extension of fate itself. When the strike came, it was not vengeance that fell upon Aizen, but closure, the calm of a storm completing its cycle. The winter war ended not with triumph but with quiet, the kind of quiet that follows mourning. Aizen's voice faded into the distance, his form sealed beneath layers of silence, while Ichigo, emptied of his power, stood under the endless sky as a boy once more, feeling the wind touch him without weight. Around him, the world began to knit itself back together, Soul Society rebuilding its walls, Hueco Mundo returning to its dreaming stillness, and the living world stirring as though from a long and troubled sleep. Those who survived carried their scars like constellations, small lights scattered across the dark sea of memory. The captains returned to their divisions, but the rhythm of their footsteps had changed. Some found peace in the return to duty, others only restlessness. For the winter war was not merely fought on battlefields, but within hearts, the war between conviction and doubt, order and chaos, the eternal question of whether power exists to preserve or to understand. In the nights that followed, snow continued to fall softly over Seiraite, though no clouds passed above. It drifted down through moonlight, each flake shimmering like a soul at peace. Rukia stood beneath the falling light and thought of Ichigo's smile, of his humanity, of the endless courage it takes to remain kind in the face of despair. And Byakuya, standing beside her, thought of the fragility of all things, of honor, of legacy, of the fine line between strength and mercy. The winter war, in its end, left behind a lesson that lingered longer than its battles, that even in conflict the soul seeks harmony, that even in ruin the heart searches for meaning. And as the snow continued to fall, covering the remnants of fire and fury, the worlds, all three of them exhaled at last, their breath rising into the night like mist, whispering of rest, of renewal, of the slow, eternal peace that follows every storm. There are souls who walk among the living but are forever marked by the faint shimmer of the other side, carrying within them the weight of something unseen, the residue of worlds touching. They are not Shinigami nor hollow, not spirits nor mortals in the ordinary sense, but something in between, full-bringers, whose power is born not from death, but from life touched by loss, from the lingering thread of spiritual memory left behind when the departed refused to vanish completely. They are the inheritors of echoes, the living reflections of those who could not let go. The story of the Fullbringers begins not in legend but in quiet tragedy, each one a child who had been brushed by the hand of a hollow while still in the womb, each born carrying a fragment of that spiritual residue within them. The mark did not make them cursed. It made them sensitive to the unseen rhythm of existence. They grew into the world of humans, feeling its weight differently, hearing whispers in silence, seeing color in the emptiness of air, sensing the pulse of life hidden in objects others thought inert. In time, they discovered that through will, through focus, through longing, they could awaken that connection, that a fragment of soul could inhabit even the simplest thing. For the full-bringers, objects are vessels of memory. A pendant, a book, a shoe, a cross, a photograph, all carry traces of the hands that have held them, the hearts that have loved them. Through touch, the full-bringer awakens these traces, bending them into motion, into strength, into form. It is an art of intimacy, of empathy, of listening deeply to what lingers behind use. In this way, every ability is unique, every awakening a dialogue between soul and world. Riruka's affection transforms confinement into beauty. Jackie's resentment manifests as power drawn from the dirt beneath her feet. Yukio's isolation becomes an infinite digital space where control is absolute. Their gifts are not random, but reflections of who they are, the unspoken desires that have defined their lives turned outward, made visible. When Ichigo's power was lost after the Winter War, it was the Fullbringers who reached out to him, their leader Kugo Ginjo offering both restoration and temptation. He, too, was a man of duality, once the first substitute Soul Reaper, later a wanderer disillusioned by betrayal. His smile held warmth and distance all at once, his words crafted like weapons, his ideals born of scars. To him, the world was divided between those who took and those who endured. And when he saw Ichigo, powerless yet unbroken, he recognized a kindred loneliness, the ache of one who has carried too much, who has seen too deeply into the spaces between worlds. Under Ginjo's guidance, Ichigo trained once more, learning to channel the subtle spiritual resonance that still lingered within him, shaping it through his substitute badge, rediscovering the rhythm of combat, as if tracing the memory of a song long forgotten. His bringer light, shone with the same flickering strength as his spirit, stubborn, unyielding, alive with warmth even in despair. But as he grew, so too did the shadows around him, for within the group's camaraderie lay betrayal, within kindness, manipulation. Ginjo's true intention, hidden behind his soft voice and knowing smile, was to draw Ichigo into his own spiral of resentment, to make him see the Soul Society not as guardian but as jailer, to teach him that power born from others' will is no freedom at all. And when the betrayal came, when Ichigo's trust was shattered once more, it was not rage that filled him, but quiet sorrow, the ache of one who had believed, if only for a moment, that the world might stop taking from him. Yet the Soul Society had been watching, and in that moment of deepest loss, the captains returned not as distant overseers, but as witnesses to his resilience. Rukia, her hand trembling yet steady, pierced him once more not in despair, but in rebirth. Her sword did not wound, it awakened. Shinigami power returned to Ichigo in a surge of brilliance, not erasing his human heart, but merging with it, honoring everything he had become through pain and endurance. The Fullbring dissolved, but its memory remained, woven into his blade, into the rhythm of his soul. The battle that followed between Ichigo and Ginjo was less a fight than a confession, two mirrors colliding, two versions of the same story told in different tones. Ginjo's anger was not evil but exhaustion, his rebellion, not against justice, but against loneliness. He fought because he could not forgive a world that demanded he suffer for being different. Ichigo fought because he refused to believe that difference must mean isolation. Their clash was a conversation between despair and hope, between the past's wound and the future's promise. In the end, Ichigo struck, not to destroy, but to release. As Ginjo fell, the moonlight caught the faintest smile on his face, the peace of a man who, for the first time, saw in his opponent not an enemy, but an understanding. Ichigo carried his body to the Soul Society himself, not as tribute or proof, but as gesture, the act of closing a circle, of honoring even the fallen dreamers who had sought freedom in flawed ways. The Fullbringers vanished slowly from the story of the living world, their powers fading into quiet legend, yet their existence remains a reminder of something precious, that humanity is not weakness, that even in a world of gods and ghosts, the human heart is capable of miracles. Their abilities were born from affection, from the bond between person and object, between presence and memory, between life and what it leaves behind. In this way, the Fullbringers are perhaps the purest expression of what Bleach has always whispered, that connection itself is power, that memory gives form to existence, that every touch, every name, every kindness becomes a kind of immortality. They were the bridge not between worlds, but between meanings, showing that even in the smallest moments, the ordinary carries the extraordinary. When night falls over Karakura and the city lights shimmer like fragments of lost stars, one might imagine that somewhere out there, a child picks up an old trinket and feels a pulse, faint but real, in their palm. Perhaps the story of the Fullbringers never ended. Perhaps it continues quietly, in every memory that refuses to fade, in every heart that finds strength not from power, but from love. There are stories written not in ink but in light, stories that stretch backward through centuries, radiant and terrible, the kind that hum softly even when no one remembers their beginning. Such is the story of the Quincy, the tribe of archers who reached upward instead of inward, who sought to purify by erasure rather than by patience, who shaped their strength from light itself, and in doing so, carved their destiny in brilliance and ruin alike. To speak of them is to trace a lineage of faith and defiance, a people who refused to yield to the flow of souls, who believed that salvation could be claimed by force of will alone. The Quincy were born from humanity's yearning to stand against the unseen, to look into the dark corners of the world and not turn away. Long before the Shinigami came to guide the dead, before the cycle of purification was set in place, there were men and women who saw spirits roaming and wept for them, who feared them, and who resolved to end their wandering. With bows drawn from reishi and arrows forged from light, they became hunters of hollows, protectors of the living, their purity, their weapon, their compassion, their creed. But light, when wielded too fiercely, casts shadows of its own, and so began the tension between them and the Shinigami. For where the Shinigami saw the cycle as sacred, the Quincy saw it as complacent. The Shinigami sought to cleanse the hollowed souls and return them to the flow. The Quincy sought to destroy them utterly, to obliterate corruption in its entirety. And in that difference, harmony fractured. The Quincy believed that mercy without strength was hypocrisy, that to let evil linger was to betray the innocent. The Shinigami, in turn, saw the Quincy's method as dangerous, for the annihilation of souls threatened to unravel the balance of existence itself, reducing the flow of reishi that sustains all worlds. Conflict became inevitable, and what began as divergence became slaughter. The Quincy purges were not wars of malice, but of inevitability, the light burning too bright against the shadow that sought to preserve it. Entire families vanished into history's silence, their cities reduced to whispers, their names erased from memory. Yet even in their defeat, the Quincy endured, for light cannot truly be extinguished. It only hides, waiting for the right horizon to rise again. In the bloodlines that survived in scattered descendants like Uryu Ishida, quiet and proud, archers of precision and grace, the pulse of that ancient defiance remained. The Quincy power is not chaotic. It is precise, mathematical, like music rendered in geometry. Their bows do not draw string but air itself, condensing spirit particles into pure radiance, each arrow both destruction and prayer. Their uniforms gleam white as moonlight, symbols of clarity and distance, of hearts that believe in their own righteousness. They fight not with rage but with purpose, and in their purpose lies their flaw, for certainty leaves no room for compassion. And yet, within that lineage of pride, there is beauty too, the kind born of conviction. Uru, descendant of a long line of hunters, bears his heritage with both pain and honor. His grandfather Soka and Ishida sought peace, believing that coexistence with the Shinigami was possible, that balance could be restored without blood. But his words fell on deaf ears, and his death became the final note in a song that had begun long before his birth. Through Uryu, that contradiction continues the pride of the Quincy and the empathy of the man who refuses to let pride define him. His arrows fly not for vengeance, but for understanding. Deep within the Quincy's hidden history lies the name that would one day awaken again. Yahweh, the progenitor, the sleeping god of their light, whose essence was divided among his children, whose awakening would bring both salvation and end. He was called many things, Father of the Quincy, King of Light, the Almighty, but above all, he was inevitability given form. In his bloodline, all Quincy were connected. Through his will, all were bound. His existence was not creation but reflection, the light that remembers itself, the consciousness that spreads like dawn through every descendant's pulse. Even in their long dormancy, the Quincy were never gone. They watched from the edges, studying the soul society that had condemned them, learning its rhythms, its arrogance, its weakness. In secret, they rebuilt what had been lost, gathering under banners unseen, their empire sleeping beneath the surface of the known worlds. And when Yehuak stirred after 1,000 years, the silence of light turned to thunder. But long before that awakening, the soul of the Quincy remained luminous, a mixture of pain and devotion, of faith and rebellion. They were the ones who looked at the endless cycle and asked, why must it be so? They were the ones who believed that the power to destroy was also the power to save. And though history branded them as heretics, there was courage in their defiance, a stubborn purity that refused to accept passivity as virtue. Their techniques, Hirenkyaku, the swift step, Blut Vene, the blood-woven defense, Ranso Tengai, the puppetry of nerves, all reflect their philosophy: mastery over body, over space, over soul. Every movement is deliberate, every shot a statement that control is the truest form of freedom. And yet, the tragedy of the Quincy lies in this very control, in their refusal to surrender, to trust in the natural rhythm of endings and beginnings. They sought permanence in a world built on impermanence, clarity in a universe made of mystery. Even so, when their arrows pierce the air, one cannot deny their beauty, the elegance of light carving through the dark, the instant between silence and impact where everything seems to hold its breath. The Quincy stand as reminders that righteousness and ruin often share the same path. That conviction, when untethered from compassion, burns as fiercely as hatred. And yet, their legacy endures in Uru's quiet eyes, in the ghost of Soken's kindness, in the pulse of that sleeping empire beneath the fabric of all worlds. The Quincy are both lesson and lamentation, the price of unbending light, the cost of believing too purely in one's own truth. Still, their story is not finished, for light, once scattered, will gather again, and when it does, the balance of creation will tremble, and all that was hidden will rise to be seen. The empire of light waits in silence, patient as dawn, and somewhere within its glow, the first heartbeat of a king begins to stir once more. There are stories that sleep for centuries, buried beneath layers of silence and dust, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And when they do, it is not with the sound of thunder, but with the slow exhalation of inevitability. So it was with Yahwach, the progenitor of the Quincy, the king whose bloodline was not lineage but light itself, whose awakening would ripple through every realm like a storm long foreseen. He was born in stillness, in the emptiness that existed before faith found form, a being who carried both gift and curse within him, for every soul that touched his power found themselves healed, and every fragment of that healing became his own strength. Thus, from compassion he was made divine, and from divinity he was made endless. He was the father of the Quincy and the embodiment of their truth, the belief that light could command the flow of the universe, that will could overcome the laws of balance. When he first opened his eyes, the world trembled softly, and all those connected to his essence felt the echo of his return, the faint pulse beneath their skin, the glimmer that whispered, "The Almighty has awakened." And so began the 1,000-year blood war, a conflict that was less a battle of armies and more a collision of destinies, the inevitable reckoning between creation and its reflection. The Wandenreich, the invisible empire, rose from the shadows of history like an eclipse. It had always been there, hidden in the crevices between life and afterlife, sustained by the fragments of Yahwach's will that lived within his descendants. Its soldiers, cloaked in white, moved like phantoms of light and judgment, their bows drawn not with hatred, but with purpose to reclaim the balance they believed was stolen, to restore the dominion of the Quincy over all things. They struck not from vengeance, but from conviction, their assault upon the Soul Society swift and merciless, as though time itself had remembered an ancient debt. The first invasion descended like a winter wind, silent, unstoppable. The Shinigami, proud and orderly, found themselves unprepared for an enemy that could erase their power with a touch, that could rewrite their strength into weakness. The Quincy had evolved. They no longer sought to destroy the world of souls, but to conquer it, to reweave its structure in their own image. Their leader, Yahwach, did not roar commands, nor revel in cruelty. He simply was, the calm at the center of annihilation. His voice was a whisper, his gaze infinite, and wherever he turned, existence itself seemed to bend in acknowledgement. His gift, the Almighty, was the cruelest form of knowledge, the ability to see all futures, to perceive every possibility, to exist in a state beyond choice. He was the God who could never be surprised, the seer condemned to certainty. And in that perfection lay tragedy, for to know every outcome is to be stripped of wonder, of hope, of the beauty that lives in uncertainty. Yahwach sought to merge all realms, the Soul Society, the human world, Hueco Mundo, into one, to erase the boundaries that define them, believing that only unity could end suffering. But unity without difference is not peace, it is silence, and in silence the soul ceases to sing. The captains fell one by one in that first assault, not from weakness, but from awe. Yamamoto Genryusai, ancient as flame, stood before Yahwach with the fury of 1,000 winters in his sword. His fire consumed the sky, his will set the air ablaze, and for a moment it seemed that the world itself would bow to his rage. But even fire dies when it has burned too long. Yahwach struck him down not with hatred, but with inevitability, his blade moving as though he were simply correcting the flow of history. When the old man fell, the light of Seirite dimmed, and the age of gods began to fade. But light is not so easily defeated. The survivors rose again: Shunsui, Ukitake, Byakuya, Rukia, Renji, Hitsugaya, each carrying not only duty but memory. The war that followed was both chaos and elegy, 1,000 stories converging into one long night. Quincy and Shinigami clashed, beneath skies torn open by Rishi storms, their blades and arrows weaving a tapestry of light and shadow that stretched from one horizon to the next. Beneath it all, Ichigo moved like a thread of balance, his power a chorus of contradictions. Shinigami and Hollow, human and Quincy, the living embodiment of what Yahweh sought to erase. For Ichigo, the battle was not against an enemy, but against inheritance. His own blood carried the echo of Yahweh's, the reflection of the same ancient light that had once illuminated all souls. Each time he swung his sword, it was as though he cut through his own fate, separating himself from the lineage that sought to claim him. His blade, Zangetsu, whispered truths he was not ready to hear, that the old man who guided him in his inner world was not only his sword's spirit, but the remnant of Yehwach's soul within him, a fragment of divinity masquerading as mentor. The revelation shattered and healed him all at once, for in learning the truth, Ichigo did not lose himself, he simply became whole. The war raged on, relentless, until the distinction between light and dark began to blur. Quincy fought not merely for conquest, but for belief. Shinigami not merely for survival, but for meaning. The world trembled under the weight of their conviction, and for a moment it seemed as though the cycle of souls itself might fracture. But within that storm, there was also awakening. Rukia's Bankai, pure as winter's first breath, Renji's true Zabimaru, roaring with devotion, Byakuya's renewed grace, Ichigo's twin blades, black and white, born of union rather than division. All these became hymns of defiance against inevitability. When the end came, it was quiet, as endings always are. Yahweh stood in the ruins of his creation, the world around him trembling on the edge of assimilation, and for the first time he faltered. In Ichigo's eyes, he saw not defiance, but compassion, the same compassion that had once made him divine. And in that reflection, he remembered what he had lost. The blade that struck him was not vengeance, but mercy, the closing of a circle that had begun 1,000 years before. As his form dissolved into light, Yahweh whispered of the world that might have been a world without walls, without death, and even as he faded, his voice lingered, soft and sorrowful, like the last note of a hymn unfinished. The 1,000-year blood war ended as it began, with silence. The Wandenreich crumbled, its empire of light returning to dust, and the Soul Society, wounded but breathing, turned once more toward the long work of rebuilding. Yet something ineffable had changed. The boundaries between realms felt thinner, the air heavier with understanding. Yahwach's dream, though denied, left behind a truth the world could not forget, that every wall exists only because the heart fears its own reflection, and that perhaps, someday, even gods will learn to listen to the spaces between light and dark. And so the King of Light fell back into shadow, not defeated, but fulfilled, his story folding into the greater tapestry of existence. The dawn that followed was pale and trembling, but real, the kind of dawn that comes only after centuries of night, when even the sky must relearn how to breathe. There are truths that lie beyond sight and sound, truths that hum like a heartbeat through the fabric of every world, soft yet ceaseless. And one of those truths is this, that the soul is never truly still, never entirely lost, never entirely new. It moves endlessly, from one form to another, from one breath to the next, carrying fragments of memory like starlight caught in glass. In the universe of Bleach, Everything, every spirit, every moment of joy or pain belongs to that infinite cycle, the rhythm that gives existence its quiet, trembling grace. It is a story told not in words but in motion, the gentle flow between living and dying, forgetting and remembering, sorrow and peace. The cycle of reincarnation, called the Seisara of souls, is the unseen current that flows beneath the three worlds, the living realm, the soul society, and Hueco Mundo. Every time a Shinigami purifies a hollow, every time a human dies and a kanso is performed, the balance holds. Souls return to the flow, their essence dispersed into the ocean of Reishi, to rise again as new life somewhere far away. There is no hierarchy in this current, no judgment, only continuity. In this way, death is not an ending but a return, the soul folding back into the rhythm that birthed it, carrying within it faint traces of what it once was, like the scent of rain on long-dried earth. Some say that memory dissolves in that passage, that what we were is washed away by mercy, but others whisper that not everything is forgotten. In the quiet corners of the Soul Society, among the monks and archivists who study the unseen, there are those who believe that echoes remain not as conscious recollection, but as instinct, as déjà vu, as unexplainable tenderness toward a stranger's face. Perhaps it is why souls find each other again and again, why friendship and love bloom across lifetimes, their roots buried in a soil older than memory itself. When one looks at Ichigo and Rukia, or Byakuya and Renji, or any of the countless souls whose lives have touched and intertwined, one feels that truth moving beneath the surface. Their bonds defy the divisions between worlds, between death and life, between power and frailty. They remind us that the soul is not linear. It is a spiral, forever returning to the same lessons, forever learning to forgive, to hope, to try again. The Shinigami, in their ceaseless work, are not wardens of death but custodians of remembrance, ensuring that no life, however brief, is ever wasted, that every sorrow feeds the soil of future joy. There is a saying whispered among the healers of the fourth division, that a soul carries as much weight as the love it remembers. They believe that the marks we leave on others are what allow us to find our way back, that kindness is a kind of compass in the fog between lives. Even the hollows, those broken spirits twisted by hunger, are not condemned forever. When purified, they too return to the stream, their pain dissolved, their hearts made whole again. In that way, even despair becomes part of creation's song, its discord resolving back into harmony. The Shinigami themselves exist within this truth, bound by the same impermanence they oversee. Though they live for centuries, though their memories stretch beyond what the human mind could bear, they too feel the slow erosion of time, the soft fading of attachment. Yet there is beauty in that impermanence, in knowing that nothing, not even sorrow, endures unchanged. For even in the stillness of Seiraite, where the sun never sets and the rivers never freeze, time moves, subtle as breath, reshaping hearts that have seen too much. Reincarnation, in this universe, is not a reward nor a punishment. It is balance itself, a mercy that ensures no soul bears the weight of eternity alone. To live forever would be to stagnate. To forget completely would be to lose meaning. So the soul drifts between the two, remembering just enough to continue its song. When a spirit passes from the soul society into the world of the living once more, it carries with it a faint warmth, a rhythm, a kindness that may not be explained but is deeply felt. That is the universe's quiet promise, that nothing good is ever truly gone. Even the divisions between realms, the human world, the soul society, Hueco Mundo are not barriers but reflections of the same truth in different forms. The living carry the weight of potential, the soul society carries the memory of being, and Hueco Mundo carries the sorrow of forgetting. Together, they form a single pulse, like the three chambers of one great heart. When balance wavers, when one grows too strong, the heart falters and the worlds ache, but always, inevitably, equilibrium returns. For as long as there are souls willing to forgive, to protect, to remember, the cycle cannot break. Ichigo's journey, from mortal to Shinigami to something beyond both, is the perfect metaphor for this endless flow. He has died and lived countless times in spirit and in heart, yet each version of himself carries the same core of compassion. His story tells us that identity is not fixed. It is the memory of connection that defines us, not the shape of our body or the title we bear. In his hands, the sword Zangetsu becomes more than weapon or symbol. It is continuity itself, the thread that binds all iterations of his soul across the shifting tapestry of time. There are moments, rare and quiet, when the boundary between lives feels thin, when the breeze carries whispers of the past, a song heard once in another existence, a scent that tugs at something ancient within. In those moments, one might understand what the monks of the spirit library mean when they say that to live is to remember and to forget at once, that every life is both echo and beginning. And perhaps, in the end, the greatest meaning of reincarnation is mercy, the chance to begin again, to forgive oneself by becoming someone new, to mend what once was broken not through eternity, but through renewal. The soul's true strength is not its power, but its endurance, the quiet, tireless way it keeps seeking light, even after falling 1,000 times into shadow. When the wind sweeps softly across Seirite's gardens, carrying the scent of blooming sakura over the quiet graves of those who have passed, it feels as though the world itself is breathing, remembering, forgiving. The petals fall, the rivers flow, and somewhere unseen, another soul awakens, taking its first breath in a new life, unknowing but radiant. For in the nature of the soul lies the promise of all things, that love does not end, that meaning does not fade, that even in the stillest silence, existence continues to sing. There are nights that come so softly you barely notice them, when the air itself seems to hum with memory, and the world, at last, feels still. It is in such quiet that the story of Bleach comes to rest, not with the clash of swords or the echo of battle, but with the exhale that follows, the sigh of a world that has survived itself. The wars are over, the kings have fallen, the rivers have run their course, and what remains is the slow return of ordinary rhythm, the sound of footsteps on Seirite's white paths, the laughter of souls reborn, the whisper of wind brushing through the cherry trees that bloom as if nothing had ever been broken. After the 1,000-year blood war, the soul society stands renewed, not unchanged but wiser, its light gentler, its halls quieter. The scars on its walls have been mended but not erased, for they are reminders that even perfection must be tempered by humility. The Gote 13 remains, its captains different, its spirit the same. Where Yamamoto's fire once ruled, Shunsui Kyoraku now leads with a smile that hides old grief, his voice softer but no less steady. Rukia Kuchiki, who once stood trembling before judgment, now wears the white haori of captaincy, her calm as pure as the snow her blade commands. Renji stands beside her, his loyalty still fierce, his laughter louder now, the edges of his once restless soul finally eased. Byakuya, unchanged in posture yet gentler in gaze, has learned that strength without kindness is brittle. The wind through the Kuchiki manor carries a peace he never thought he'd know. In the barracks, Hitsugaya Toshiro walks among his subordinates, a boy no longer his eyes colder but his heart, perhaps, warmer. Kenpachi still seeks battles but now smiles more easily, his laughter no longer wild but human, the sound of a storm that has learned to admire the stillness it once destroyed. Mayuri, forever curious, continues his experiments, his madness undimmed, though even he sometimes pauses to watch the sky, as though remembering the names of those who challenged his arrogance. In the 12th Division, the lights never go out, their glow a constant reminder that discovery and danger are two faces of the same God. The Seirite of this new age is not as proud as before. It has learned to listen. Its gates, once symbols of exclusion, now open more often to the living world, for the barrier between life and death has grown thinner, more forgiving. The souls who enter its streets are greeted with warmth, and the children of Rukongai play where soldiers once marched. The bells still ring to mark the changing of the watch, but their tone is softer, as though even the metal remembers to be gentle. And far beyond the white walls, in the living world, Ichigo Kurosaki lives quietly in Karakura once more, his orange hair bright against the muted rhythm of everyday life. The war has left him older in spirit, yet his smile carries the same sunlight it always did, the light of someone who has seen too much and still chooses kindness. His home is filled with voices, Orihime's, tender and unwavering, Chad's, deep and patient, Oru's, measured and calm. Their lives have folded back into the pattern of days, but the connection between them hums, still, invisible, yet eternal, like a golden thread woven through their every word. Sometimes, Ichigo looks toward the horizon at dusk, when the sun bleeds into the river and the air turns gold, and he feels something stir, a faint echo of power, of distant bells, of friends standing under a sky that knows no boundary. He smiles then, not with longing, but with peace, knowing that part of him will always belong to that other world, to that dance of souls that never truly ends. The world itself breathes differently now. Hueco is quiet, its dunes no longer trembling with endless hunger. The last of the Arrancar wander without purpose, their masks cracked, but their hearts still faintly beating, as if the void itself has learned compassion. The Quincy, too, have faded into memory, their light dispersed, their empire dissolved, but perhaps somewhere, in the farthest corners of existence, a single arrow of pure reishi still drifts, glowing faintly, waiting to be found by a new soul with a familiar heartbeat. And through it all, the balance holds. Souls continue their flow, birth, death, rebirth, each life a brushstroke in the same vast painting, each story a ripple in the endless sea of memory. The Shinigami still guide them, though now they walk their duty with greater gentleness, their understanding deeper for the wars they have survived. They know now that to protect does not mean to rule, that peace is not stillness but motion, the slow turning of the universe toward harmony. In Seirite, beneath the blooming sakura, there stands a monument of simple stone, engraved not with names but with a single phrase: "May every soul find its way home." The petals fall around it like snow, and the air smells of spring, of endings that are beginnings, of silence that feels like a heartbeat. Somewhere, Rukia pauses as she walks, looking up at the petals drifting past, her thoughts quiet but full, and for a moment it is as if she can feel Ichigo's laughter carried on the wind, reaching across realms to remind her that connection is eternal, that goodbyes are only pauses between meetings. Time passes, as it always does, as it must. The world turns, the souls flow, the balance endures. But every now and then, when night deepens and the moonlight spills over the rooftops of both worlds, one might sense it, the faint hum of unseen energy, the whisper of swords resting in peace, the murmur of names carried by the wind. And in that sound lives everything Bleach ever was: the beauty of impermanence, the strength of compassion, the endless song of souls, finding one another again and again, through lifetimes without end. And as that wind drifts into silence, as the petals settle and the light fades, there is a sense that the story does not stop. It simply changes form, becoming softer, becoming memory. The worlds of Bleach remain not in battle, but in balance, a stillness that feels alive, a peace that breathes. So let us rest here, in this quiet world after war, where the river of souls flows steady and kind, where every ending folds gently into another beginning. Close your eyes. Let the echo of their stories hum through you, like the rhythm of distant waves, and know the tale continues, softly, endlessly, within every heart that remembers.